What's happening, people? Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you're doing well. We lack perspective, obviously. We lack perspective as individuals and as a collective, as culture and society made up of individuals. We lack perspective in total. And this is a problem for us, increasingly for all of us. It is it becomes increasingly difficult for an adult to see things from a new vantage point in a new light. It's difficult for children and for adolescents to do this, but as we age, it becomes increasingly difficult for us to see things in a new light with a different context or without context because we become acclimated, accustomed to, and comfortable with things as they are. It's just easier. We don't want things to change because once we know an environment, we do not want to expend the energy to understand a new one and learn how to navigate that one to optimization to homeostasis. We want to remain as is, and we want things to remain as is, innately, intuitively. Even if pushed and challenged, we may not admit that, but as we act naturally without checking ourselves, that's what we desire. And because of this, I think we're looking at one of the main culprits when we're talking about what keeps the world from progressing and advancing rapidly toward better. Well, a lack of perspective is one of the main culprits because lacking perspective means that you cannot see whatever it is that you're talking about with objectivity in a truer, more universal, more broad light. Almost always, seeing things from a broader, more universal perspective gives them a truer tint, a truer hue. You can see them more faithfully as they truly are and what they are in a broader context. Within a narrow context, you cannot know what anything is with any certainty, with any confidence. You can make up any theory you want, any fantastical philosophy, but you are literally the blind men touching the elephant, coming up with different theories, or you're the people in the cave looking at shadows on the wall. Without context to see things properly and objectively and accurately, we cannot assess our own lives, our own conditions, our own circumstances, or the actions of another with any faithfulness, with any reliability on hitting on something worth speaking about or communicating. So because of this, because we lack perspective, I think what we're essentially doing when we're talking about improving the world is we're overcomplicating things. We're making this like it's the most arduous task that could ever be devised by human beings when it's not. There are plenty of theories, there are plenty of ways of better, of doing better. But when when certain groups of people hold social power, political, economic power, and they dictate terms, and they're unwilling to consider things from new lights, new perspectives, new vantage points. What it essentially necessitates is that everyone else that is subordinate to this political, economic, cultural, social power must make do, must fit in and get in wherever they can. They must adjust and morph and contort to fit into something that may not necessarily be right in a broader sense. It may be right for a subset of the population, for a small group, even if it's the majority of the population, but it is not necessarily right or even good in a broader sense for humanity. Just because something's working, just because something's comfortable, because something's good, doesn't mean it must be. And that's why I'm making this video, because I think we have a difficult time, as I said, seeing things from a new vantage point in a new light. Whether we're adolescent, juvenile, or aging adults, this is difficult for us as humans. Now, I did not try psilocybin until after I had the most profound and utterly transformative spiritual experience. So most of my life, gaining perspective was done out of necessity, out of existential maintenance, out of existential necessity, just to have a good life. I ran into situations and circumstances where they were not working for me. The way things were would have required me to contort and morph and bend and smash myself into such a form that it would cause me such great suffering that it was not worth it. So in a sense, I cultivated perspective naturally and intellectually and experientially out of necessity. I had to find alternative ways of viewing the world, myself, the people in it, and how I was going to move through this world. Because the things that were on offer, the things that were laid at my feet, the things that were presented as available to me were not working. So I had to see things from a different vantage point. So personally, I've done this and I know the difficulty in doing so. It definitely requires you to be willing increasingly to abandon everything that isn't right and isn't good. Now, it doesn't mean that I've abandoned or you should abandon every single thing on earth in your life and adopt whatever new thing seems like it holds possibility. But it does mean that you should be willing to, and that you should be working on that. So I want to present to you my experiences with psilocybin because I believe it is so powerful, it's so important as far as expanding our options and giving us additional degrees of freedom, that I think everyone that considers himself an adult or wants to be considered an adult should go through this as a rite of passage. Not necessarily mandated or forced, but anyone that wants to impact the world and other people in any way of any significance, I think should go through this rite of passage just to gain what I would call 1 billion or 2 degrees of freedom in a 12-hour span, which is how long the highest dose of psilocybin that I've ever taken lasted. So what I'm going to do in this video essentially is I'm going to talk about 3 different experiences that I've had with psilocybin. And the first one would be essentially the wrong environment. It would have been in a party environment as an adult, as someone that's awake and aware. But in support of a friend, I engaged in psilocybin for the first time in a party environment. Not ideal. Then the second experience would be in a more conducive environment, a home, comfortable setting, but not necessarily doing it in the right way, not engaging in it in the way that many of the experts and the people that have essentially made psilocybin mushrooms and other substances current event and popular topics these days. And then the third situation, the third scenario, the third experience would be what I would call the recommended approach. And that is at a high dosage in a dark environment, comfortable environment. And I'll talk about all 3. But the reason for this, the reason we need to do this now more than ever, the reason we all need perspective and additional degrees of freedom is because we're stuck. We cannot find our way out of this. We seemingly have hit our head enough times to where we're increasingly starting to believe that there may not be any hope. There may not be a solution, and that's just absurd. There are so many solutions on offer and available currently that the fact that the world isn't better is embarrassing. The fact that the world isn't asymptotically close to a utopian environment is embarrassing because we have it in our capacity and our ability to move our civilization, our lives, and our experience toward that. Now, what we're doing, we're limiting ourselves in our degrees of freedom, our ways to make things better. And it's very much like suffering. And I'm going to get to psilocybin in a minute, but I want to preface this because I think this is important. I think you need to understand why I'm even talking about this and why these things hold merit. When you lack degrees of freedom, it means that you have little options. You have almost no options to improve your circumstance, your situation. And I think that directly leads to suffering. I think that's one of the root causes of suffering. When a person is depressed, they have no way. When they're utterly depressed, clinically, truly depressed, they can see no way out of their current circumstance. They can see no hope for better. And when you have no hope for the next second or the next day or the next year being an improvement to your current circumstance, then that's a terrible way to be. That's a terrible place to be as a human being. And we should understand that in that light, that it is like being in prison of the worst order. Now, beyond depression, we have people that may be fearful of death and fearful of other circumstances and situations. And that's just because they don't see enough possibilities. But really what we're talking about here is just suffering in general, negativity in life, just a better life, moving your way asymptotically toward perfection, toward bliss, toward an ecstatic existence requires you to navigate this world, and to navigate it intelligently and skillfully, I think you need to see multiple angles, because you're going to hit an impasse, you're going to hit a roadblock, and you're going to find that potentially until you get it right, that you may not be right, and you need to deviate and modify your progression. Now, last point on this is that trying to improve the world without seeing it, without attachment, without the necessity that it be a thing, and then we change small portions of the thing to see it as it is and to see it as something that can be dismantled and a new thing can be erected in its place. To see it like that means that we must abandon the attachment and identification to what is. Now, I look at this like science and philosophy and things like this. It'd be like us having a scientific theory and wanting to know more and to do better, and having all the evidence in the world that our scientific theory has hit a roadblock. Well, in that situation, in that case, the only thing to do is to consider things that you have not considered thus far. Maybe potentially even abandoning this theory. We need to consider things that may not even fit within the confines of this theory, and put them on the table and see how they stack up against, and whichever one holds the most merit, whichever one is the most feasible, given the amount of energy we're willing to expend, should be on offer, should be considered. And that's the way I think we move the world forward. We have to be willing to look at the current state of economies, of culture, the way we organize our society and civilization, the way we educate our children and feed ourselves. Everything should be on offer. It doesn't mean that you do away with anything abruptly in a knee-jerk fashion, but it does mean that you're willing to dismantle and let go of everything. As long as you are dependent upon and insistent upon something remaining static and still, then you've handicapped yourself. You've hamstrung yourself toward better by a great order of magnitude. You have basically said that I want the world to be better and I want things to change, but I need X, Y, and Z to remain the same. I need X, A, B, and C to stay consistent. Well, you've put a lot of constraints up on progress. You've put a lot of constraints upon better. And essentially, to be crass, essentially all you're doing potentially is shining shit. You need to throw that shit away if you see it as shit and let it go. No matter how attached you are, no matter how much you're in love with the fragrance and the aroma, you should see it with objectivity, as everyone else may around you, as something that is not necessarily good or warranting you holding and maintaining and protecting. Now, psilocybin offers us the ability, the path, the option to see things in a new light. It doesn't necessarily force it upon you. And that's where I think psilocybin and ayahuasca differ. If you take a high dose of psilocybin, you can still have outs. You can still break seemingly the trip. You can still break the experience. Where with ayahuasca, if you take enough of it, you're in there. So unlike ayahuasca, I think psilocybin should be on offer for everyone. Ayahuasca, let's leave that in reserve for emergencies when you really need it as a measure of last resorts, because it can hurt you if you don't have a shaman, if you don't have someone skilled there. And I will continue to talk about it like that. If you don't have someone skilled and experienced in this entheogen, in this practice, do not take ayahuasca. And that's my advice. And I won't say much more about that here. Now, psilocybin is something that is a little bit easier. It's not cannabis, but I think the LD50 of it is way, way higher than cannabis. So to kill yourself, to die, to be harmed and injured in any physical way on psilocybin is almost inconceivable. I mean, you have a much better chance of dying on cannabis than you do on psilocybin. So it's safe in a way that almost nothing is. And water isn't as safe as psilocybin in a sense. So my first experience on this substance was not necessarily transformative. I learned from everything, but it was a lesson that there are reasons that we do these things in certain environments, in certain situations and circumstances, because they provide a condition that allows us to learn and understand and explore and really gain the most. So the first time that I took psilocybin, and this is a quick story because it's not a good one. The first time I took psilocybin, like I said, it was post a transformative spiritual experience, and I was curious, and my friend in Chicago had some, a long time, friend from college. We hooked up, and he had just had a divorce, so I wanted to support him, and it was his idea to do psilocybin mushrooms and to go to a party. And this is all hypothetical, obviously. This is done in international waters or in some fantastical hypothetical situation for the purposes of this video. No laws were broken, obviously. I don't know if I need to preface that, but we took psilocybin mushrooms and we went to a party called Grits and Gravy, which was a traveling hip hop college-like party for adults that traveled from city to city. And this weekend, it was in Chicago. So we went down to the House of Blues in downtown Chicago in this wonderful venue, great woodwork, intricate, detailed theater. And we go in and it's just packed with people. And we took these psilocybin mushrooms, the mushrooms at his apartment, and they started kicking in line. And I noticed that my visual acuity had been enhanced greatly. I don't know how many orders of magnitude or how many fold of an increase it was, but I can tell you this, that I have bad eyesight. I'm wearing contacts currently. So I noticed that I could see a lot better. And this was an anomaly for me. And that was not the first oddity that I experienced when I was in this place. So when we get in, I just noticed that I'm looking at people's souls, seemingly. I'm looking at them dead in their eyes. I can see straight into their iris and their cornea and all of this. I can just see too much. It was overwhelming. And not that I could see into their soul literally, but just probably I was just being weird and just noticing too much. So I extricate myself from the thick of the thing and get up to the third level where I can isolate myself. And I'm watching the show and the DJs and the stage and the lights, and things are just moving and morphing. And I will say that it was a trip. It was not necessarily enjoyable, but it was a new experience being around people, feeling connected in this way, feeling natural, feeling a little bit more aware, a little bit more natural, a little bit more extra in a organic biological sense. That's the best I can say that happened that night, is that I felt more connected, more aware of myself, my body, and the people around me, and my visual acuity was enhanced. But there was no information transferred, no information communicated, nothing really learned directly other than don't do that again. And the reason I say this is because if it's your first time or your 50th time, people are stimuli, they are information. And if you're not in the right environment, it's just going to flavor your experience. And if you're trying to learn and actually grow and see things from new angles and new lights, you want to be in a place that's conducive to learning. And a giant packed party of people dancing to some of my favorite songs, but energetic songs, loud, is not the best place. So I learned not to do that again. I kind of knew what I was doing because I'd been listening to Terrence McKenna for a while. Terrence McKenna is the proponent, if you already don't know, of psilocybin mushrooms, along with his brother Dennis and another man named Paul Stamets, and people like him have pretty much brought this to the attention, the benefits of psilocybin to the attention of the mainstream through great effort and work over the past 20, 30 or so years. Now, Terrence McKenna has videos on YouTube that explain what he believes to be appropriate and intelligent and skilled methods for engaging in these substances. So I already knew that we were making a mistake. So the next time, I'd say it was the next day after that party or a week later, but my wife and I decided, I got some from him and did not transport these anywhere. We were in international waters, once again I say. So the next day, my wife and I, or it was the next week, one of the two, we decided to try these like responsible adults at home, hypothetically, and we partook in, I'd say, less than 2 grams apiece. It was over a gram, less than 2 grams. I'm not sure exactly the dosage, but it wasn't a huge amount and it wasn't a small amount. So we took the psilocybin mushrooms at night and we were sitting on the couch, and one thing that I noticed essentially was just the enhancement of my visual perception. Yet again, the colors were richer. Light was just more vibrant. Everything was just more saturated in a sense. But we got interrupted by a line of insects, meal bugs, pill bugs, whatever you want to call those. What do you call those? Roly-poly bugs coming out of the fireplace. And that was a little too close to nature for us in that moment. It was too abrupt. So we exited that environment and headed upstairs to our loft area, where we spent the better part of the evening on this substance in the rest of the experience. But one thing I noticed, not like I said, not too much of note here, but visually, things were even more altered, even more detailed and enhanced. Every straight line, everything that had an angle was modified. So our staircase was the width, just visually, everything seemed wider and bigger and taller. So our staircase, which was notoriously narrow from my experience in moving things up the steps, barely big enough to get a small chair up without difficulty, had become so wide that I felt like I could lay down lengthwise and couldn't even touch the walls. Even though I could, it didn't seem like I should be able to. I noticed the hallways were heightened and the doorways were straightened. Everything looked like it got straightened out, and everything that had a line or an angle was more pronounced and more enhanced. But we settled in to the loft area on the couch. We noticed that the TV was pushed back, and I laid on the ground after a little while. And one of the more stark contrasts visually from our natural experience to this altered experience was the fact that I was tiny compared to my wife, relative to my wife, who is a small woman by most measures, and I'm a slightly larger man by most measures. But in this situation, things were reversed to the extreme. My wife was gargantuan and I was tiny, and we both noticed this. This was not a thing solely in my mind or and only in her mind. We both noticed this, and it kind of freaked us out. But we didn't allow it to freak us out too much because we know how to be stable and solid, and we know that no matter what, we're always going to be good. No matter what, and I truly believe that. No matter what happens, we're good in the end. So we engaged in conversation. The conversation got emotional. We opened up to each other about a number of things. So the most significant detail of that experience, in my opinion, was the enhanced visual acuity, the alteration of our normalized environment to the same environment, but distinct. It was different. But the emotional component of that was greater, and that was noticeable. So we were more open, we were more forthcoming, and we talked for quite a while and shared a lot. And that's something that may be possible, although I don't know if that's the main benefit of psilocybin. The main benefit of psilocybin, in my opinion, is not just visual oddities and curiosities or being more open and emotional. The main benefit of psilocybin comes when you take a large amount and you go in a room and you lay down, as we did on our third attempt, which took place a month or 2 or 3 after the first couple of attempts, because we had more time to reassess, to process. And just to be honest with you, the second attempt was it wasn't the most fun situation. Psilocybin makes you prickly and irritated. Your skin is a little bit more, I guess, scratchy, if you want to put it that way. So it's not the smooth experience that like something like MDMA maybe, or something like that, or maybe even ayahuasca in a sense. It's like the DMT experiences, but just a little bit more natural in a sense that you feel like you're laying in leaves and grass. I don't know how else to explain it. So we took a little bit of a pause after that before we engaged again, because we wanted to learn a little bit more and learn how to do this more and to process what we had experienced and undergone. So the last experience, the most profound one, was a heroic dose. 5 dried grams of psilocybin mushrooms, roughly. We should be taking heroic doses of psilocybin. We should not be playing with this. We should not be partying and microdosing, because what we do when we party and we microdose is we err, but we mistakenly believe that we understand how best to use these substances, what they're best used for. We believe that we're almost there, that we're almost right, and we just need a little bit of boost to be better, or the rightness is in this world in some sense in our profession or occupation, and we just need a little bit to enhance ourselves and we can get a little extra edge. This is not about you. You don't have perspective. Trust me, no matter what anyone says, I do not believe you have enough perspective if you're microdosing on yourself to believe that you know what you should be doing, absolutely. To believe that all you need is an enhancement or an edge. If you're right, if you're on the money, you need nothing other than air and water and food, and space-time, and more laws of physics and everything, but you do not need a boost. So when we take cannabis and we strip nothing but the THC out and put it in pill form, and we take other substances and we strip them down to what we believe them to be their most important and essential components, we err because we believe we know what these things are specifically meant for and how best to use them. In this situation, we do not. In many of these situations, we do not. The best thing to do, in my opinion, and in Terence McKenna's opinion too, is to go into a dark room and lay down and close your eyes and let this thing inform you. And that's exactly what we did. But while we were waiting for them to kick in, it took a lot to get those down, by the way. It took quite a bit of dried mushroom. And what we had was, each time, all the mushrooms we had were very white. I do not know the strain or the type, but they were very, very pale white mushrooms. So stuffed those down, got those down barely. We go upstairs to the bedroom. We're talking, waiting for them to kick in. And one thing that I do notice is that on a very high dose, unlike on lower doses and unlike with other substances, you have open hallucinations and visuals, whether you like to or not. So my wife is sitting in the chair and I'm sitting on the bed, and we're having a conversation, waiting for these things to kick in. And all of a sudden, at some point, my wife is taken over. Her upper torso and head are taken over by Egyptian hieroglyphic shapes and things like this. But I'm still talking to her. I just can't see her anymore. And I remember standing up and moving through the bedroom and around that area of the house, and I remember seeing what looked exactly, literally like this. It looked like clockworks and gears, purple and gold. Maybe the overlay in the background was purple and the gold were the gears, and they were turning and spinning, and they were maneuvering like a mechanism. And this was visible everywhere in front of me, like a field of mechanics in front of me, of mechanisms in front of me, and in perpetuity, everywhere I looked and turned, but intangible and almost seemingly having no depth. And that was strange, because I've heard other accounts of this as well. And a few years after this experience, I actually had that confirmed when I heard one of Joe Rogan's friends, Brian Redband, recount his experience. And I don't know if you would believe that Brian Redband, if you know who he is, and I have a lot in common, but we have this in common. We saw the same thing on psilocybin mushrooms. So there's a common thread here. There's something in these things that is shareable and potentially reproducible in humanity. So my wife was having her moment in the chair, and I was having mine on the bed, and we were conversing. And at some point, it turned real ominous. It got really dark in the room, the vibe, the feeling, the aura. So we shifted. We said, let's not do this anymore. Let's lay down. Let's go ahead and lay down. We must be there. So we lay down and we closed our eyes, and we, in a sense, the best way I can only describe my experience on this, but the best way I can describe it is I traveled. So I traveled and I traveled and I traveled. It was a trip of the most true and real sense. So I'm laying in the bed and something comes and gets me from my right, and I'm seemingly disembodied. It somehow grabs my no hand and gently tugs on me and says, you want to come, in a sense, without speaking, just all understood, right? So I'm disembodied and I'm able to travel. I'm able to leave this body. And I don't know how to explain this if you've never experienced anything like this, but you have your full awareness. This is the thing that people do not understand likely about entheogens and psychedelics is you don't go crazy. Everything else goes crazy. You're sober, lucid, and sane while everything else around you is getting trippy. So I'm aware and I'm just disembodied as I would be if I was meditating, or unaware if like I was jogging or just in the zone. So I'm disembodied and my consciousness or what have you is taken out of my body gently, and I'm taking off, and we take off. We go. I don't know how to explain this, but we get going rapidly. Psilocybin, unlike ayahuasca, had nothing to do with this planet. It did not give a damn about this universe, where ayahuasca was solely focused, in my experience, on us as human beings and on the ecology and environment and ecosystem of this planet. It was really concerned with that. Psilocybin seemed to be like, let's get out of here. And that's the feeling I got. And we got out of here. And to borrow a term from the late great Don Howard, the founder of the Spirit Quest Shamanic Sanctuary in Iquitos, Peru, the place where I experienced the four, shamanic sanctuaries of ayahuasca, shamanic ceremonies of ayahuasca, I should say. I discussed mushrooms and psychedelics like this with him on the first night of being there. And he described mushrooms, unlike ayahuasca, which is maternal. Mushrooms and psilocybin are like foxkin. And I never heard that term before, but it makes sense. They're playful. There's nothing necessarily dangerous about them, and they're not nefarious. And they can be, from what I understand, but they seem to reward playfulness or an adventurous spirit and curiosity. So if you go into them with the desire to know and explore and learn, I think they're going to give you everything you can handle and then some extra, as I soon understood. And so we get out of there and we're going, and I get the sense that this entity, this being, this presence wants to show me something. And it did. It took me here and there and everywhere. In a sense, I didn't see what we were in until we got outside of it. And it wasn't, I'm not sure if it was the first one or the second one. And I encountered two without seeing them and anything. But in a sense, what we were doing was traveling through just layers of reality. So once we get up out of this universe, we start traveling through bubbled, pocketed, cordoned off, sectioned off realities and dimensions and universes. It's totally separate from this one. This universe is a tiny one, and we're going at speeds so fast that to compare them to light speed would not even be worthwhile. You'd have to compare these speeds traveling and traversing the expanse of this universe by a quadrillion fold every instant. That's how gargantuan the expanse is beyond what seemed like this realm. So we're out there and we're going and we're going and we're going and we're going. And we don't necessarily enter some bubble realm like in Interstellar where we go into a wormhole or something like this. You just find yourself traveling, and then all of a sudden you find yourself inhabiting a new realm and a new reality. And I think what they were trying to show us, if there's any sentience to that, if it's not just our brains manufacturing all of these experiences, I think what they're trying to show us is just possibilities beyond this one, that there's a lot of dope stuff awaiting us, a lot of dope stuff that we may be actually experiencing and engaging in concurrently, if that's possible. So I think they just want to show you stuff. They want to blow your mind. That seems to be the main aim and goal of these entities and spirits, or the presence in psilocybin, is to try to see if it can literally destroy you with amazement. So we're traveling, and we end up, I just find myself emerging or coming to with presence and awareness in a realm where I'm faced with an entity, a being, seemingly the only one in this universe, seemingly the only thing in existence in this universe was a geometric. This is the best way I can describe it because it's higher dimensional geometry, seemingly a geometric structure shifting and morphing and forming with seemingly some awareness and some sentience in it. And we locked eyes, I guess is the best way I could describe it, when there wasn't any. We locked eyes, and I got a sense that this thing was challenging me. It maybe felt some negativity in me or some apprehension in me, and it formed an ominous, nefarious, aggressive face, but not a human face, just a form. You do not allow fear into these circumstances and situations. You should always keep touch and rooted with the fact that you have a body and that you will be coming back there soon. This will be over soon once this leaves your body. So I did not break. I did not allow fear into the equation. And because of that, I think we communed. There was an understanding, and this thing started shifting and forming into more pleasant things. So that was one experience. And then one of the most profound and absurd things that I experienced was leaving the entire omniversal blackberry-like compounded, pocketed, bubbled, infinitely bubbled reality, which the ones on the outer reaches and edges were huge compared to our universe. When I say huge compared to our universe, it would be potentially like a quark compared to the entirety of the universe. There's no comparison in the scale that is beyond this universe. This universe is, or this dimension or this reality is buried somewhere deep in that blackberry, that pocketed bubble thing, somewhere incredibly deep, so far deep that I would have never been able to find it if I did not have a guide or a chaperone. It's just impossible. How they're able to keep track of all this, I have no idea. But we exit this thing, and I see it for what it is. It's like an omniversal bubble. And what I saw was this omniversal bubble seemingly existing in a void. And there was, I have no idea why these patterns emerged, but there was a pharaoh or a sarcophagus, some type of Egyptian tinged or like being or body floating in not space, but a void connected to this blackberry omniversal bubble by a tube. And even trippier potentially was, it's like the body was being maintained or reconstructed or repaired or something. It was almost seemingly dormant. And I don't know what to make of that. It was trippy. It was incredible to see. And it was almost like I understood something, but I don't believe you're supposed to be trying to make sense of psychedelic trips like psilocybin and things like this. Maybe ayahuasca, there's something to learn from there. But I think you're just supposed to understand that there's possibilities beyond your comprehension from this. So I try not to make too much sense and intellectualize or rationalize these experiences too much, because they may not be paralleling any actual existing reality. So we're out there and I'm looking at this and it just blows my mind. And I just remember, I'm not sure if it's at this instant or another, but I remember hearing my wife somehow still connected to my body, even though I'm beyond, I'm still connected to my body. And I hear my wife say something or make some noise, and I was concerned. So I speak to the presence, the awareness, the spirit, or whatever the heck you want to call the entity in this substance. And I say, I need to check on my wife. Do you mind? But I don't say this, obviously. It's just understood. They intuit this. And I got the sense where it's like, I mean, man, if you got to, you got to. That's how playful they are. They're not that serious. They're like, I mean, we're having fun. You want to interrupt this fun? You want to do that? But I mean, if you got to, you got to, dude. Go ahead. And so they, I was like, okay, appreciate it. I was like, just glad to know that I'm not going to be handcuffed and held hostage in this realm. So, I mean, they gladly obliged. And we traveled. And when I say travel, I mean the distances covered are just staggering and they are exhausting. Even though I'm not the one leading the way, it's still travel. It's just like, even if you're not flying the plane, you still get tired. So we travel back into this and so fast. And we're going through all of this and we somehow beam. Like, I don't know how, like I said, they keep track of where we are, what we're doing, who I am. But there must be a string attached or something that they can just follow back. But we fall back into this universe, and I see myself entering the cosmos, and then I see the planet Earth coming into view, and then I see the Midwest of the United States at the time where I lived, and I fall back down into my body. Without a body, I fall back down in through the roof of our house into my body, and I'm now in it. And I'm able to check on my wife and use my senses in my body. And apparently she was fine. She did not need me. She was good. That was my error in a sense, but and maybe I needed a break. But after a while, I was like, okay, you're good. She's like, yeah, what are you talking about? I was like, I think you were crying. And I'll discuss this in a second, the tears of absolute joy that I never experienced before, this experience, but never experienced before taking this high dose. So I closed my eyes again because I wanted, all right, let's get back to it. So a different entity came from seemingly the left side of my awareness and grabbed me, and we went off and did other things. And I can tell you this, that some of the things that I was shown were beyond belief. Like I said, it seemed almost like they were trying to make me have an episode, psychotic break or something, by showing me things that were too beautiful, too magnificent for my mind to contend with. But I was game. I was like, let me see. But at a certain point, even I have to turn away, even I have to relent, because there seems to be a danger of snapping. The things are beyond human comprehension. And I witnessed things. There was realms where things were happening. There were entities inhabiting certain realms. There was realms where it didn't seem like there was life at all, but there were things happening. And let's stop on that point real quick. The reason this affords you such a way out, such benefit, especially for people that are facing the end of life or facing any type of roadblock or suffering of any kind of depression, is because once you see these realms that are inhabited by seemingly non-living things that are occupied and busy, and there are still experiences to be had in these realms where there's nothing that you would necessarily call life in these realms. Maybe there's only one thing existing in these realms. Then you have other realms where there's things we would call life, but they're so foreign, you would maybe call that, seems like life, but they're so foreign that the experiences are dope, but they don't compute. They're not human. They're not earthly. They're not seemingly of this realm. So what you gain is such a plethora, an array of possibilities beyond what you once had, in degrees of freedom and options beyond what you formerly possessed, that any certainty, any notion that you're limited, any notion that you're stuck, any notion that there's anything potentially even of fear is eradicated for a period of time. As long as that's sitting in your mind, the notion that it's all drab, it's all mundane, and that you know what's going to happen, and that whatever happens isn't just going to be another trip, is absurd. And when you face the end of you, when you face the afterlife or whatever may come after this, or what may ever be existing all at the same time, it's just like, once you've been on this trip, you're almost like game for whatever. It's like, okay, I don't want to go, but if I do, it'll just be another trip. I'm accustomed to this now, because that was absurd. So whatever may be on offer and in store can only be a degree of absurd from that. Or if it's equally absurd or more absurd, then I welcome it, because I know how to contend with this. And it's one thing you can say is it's not going to be uninteresting if psilocybin, if mushrooms and psychedelics like this hold any indication, hold any credence and credibility for something beyond our current awareness. Now, I will say this. It was a 12-hour experience, and it was exhausting. And one of the most exhausting portions of it is essentially the fact, like I said, that there are things that you cannot imagine, the glory, the beauty, the magnificence. I can't describe them. I cannot ever describe them with my mouth and words. And I believe I'm a relatively articulate person. There are things I've never experienced until to this day, to that just sobbing in joy in that sense. And I was emotional. And if you were to come in that room from another place and not know what we were up to, you would think we had lost our minds or something horrible had happened, because we would be intermittent in our just cackling laughter like mad people, and our sobbing like just people that have experienced the worst blow. But the thing that was causing this was magnificent. It's almost like the only two responses we were capable of were extreme emotions, joy and sadness in a sense, in response to something that was beyond description in its beauty, something that was so beautiful, so magnificent in my experience anyway, that I had to turn away or I was going to lose my mind. It forced me. I was like, I'm looking, I'm staring, but it is too much. And if you're a fan of Rick and Morty, it's the absolute level, the perfect level, true level. It's almost like you're coming face to face with concepts that are beyond human intellect, beyond the human mind's ability to comprehend and to contend with, like the direct concept of beauty or the direct concept of love. I don't know if that's what they are, but that's the best I can describe that experience, because what you're seeing is so perfect and right that it affects you just at such a human and deep level that your only response is to cry in the face of such staggering beauty, or to cry because you understand. And it's like you're being communicated with the visual perception. It's not like somebody's talking to you or handing you anything, but it's almost like you're just being shown possibilities. Like, don't you trip, because at the minimum, you can take some more mushrooms and this will be a possibility. But even without them, this is likely a possibility. And I believe that. And that's what we need. We all need more possibilities. We all need to see things from different angles. We all need to see things from a point of view and a vantage point that isn't the current one. We can stay wherever we want, but we need to be able to move beyond this to see things as they are. I live and exist as no thing mostly, but when necessary, because of the state of this world and because of what I look like, I'm going to exist and live as a black man, but I will never be trapped by that experience and that understanding. And I would hope that other people can see the limitation in their static and rigid view of the world. If you cannot, I can. And I'm not proud of this necessarily, and I'm not bragging about this. It's just something that I've cultivated and something that's been afforded to me over a life. But I can step completely outside of a situation to view it as if I was not a human. And psilocybin can do this for you, to see it in its most objective and true light. Now, there are human rightness, human wrongs, human truths. But I think what we would want to do, if we're intelligent, if we're sincerely trying to improve things, is to try to know just truth, try to know right, not contingent, not dependent, but right. And then we can modify that to do our best to achieve that and to approximate that and come as close as we can to that. So we need more degrees of freedom. We need more ways of doing things. We need more options, and we'll suffer less. And if we're less attached, if we're less bound, if psilocybin has the potential to break down the walls, to destroy barriers, to breach boundaries and borders, then I think we need it now. I think we have tried intellectualizing and rationalizing and philosophizing about circumstances and positions and theories and situations long enough. There's a plethora yet again, an array yet again, of options and availabilities currently on hand to move this world significantly in our lives individually toward better. I've talked about a number of the ones about us as people, as individuals on this channel directly, ways that we can move toward better. But if you need to hold on to your notion of whatever your name is, whatever you think you are, none of my ways will work. And if we need the United States or the UK or the Eurozone or India or China or what have you, or Australia, or what have you, or Mexico or Canada, if you need them to maintain a rigid identity that you've known your entire life, if you need them to be a certain way and only to improve in ways that do not upset your current situation and circumstance, then we're screwed. We're done. We can't do that anymore. Potentially, those ways have outlived their usefulness long ago. There should be and are better ways, in my opinion. But I understand. I understand the difficulty of letting go of something that gives you a sense of self, gives you a sense of certainty, gives you a sense of comfort. And that's going to be a difficult ask for people without perspective. That's why we need things like this right now more than ever, because people believe they know. They believe that things are this, and there's only a little way to eke out or squeeze out a little bit of improvement or room. That is just never the case. Abandon the bad and then adopt the new. That's the way, potentially. It can cause disruption, it can cause suffering if we do it too abruptly, but that should be a possibility and an option. That's what I believe. That's truly what I believe. I believe with the added degrees of freedom, with seeing things from a different perspective, a different light. I think ultimately coming back into this body, what everyone will see is that essentially we're doing just the ape thing right now. Coming back into this body after the experience was all done, where the options out there in that DMT like space are not human. They are not organic in the way we know them. They are not earthly. So what we're doing, essentially, in my opinion, is we're doing the ape thing on this planet currently. We look like apes compared to those things. And black people, we're just dark-skinned apes. White people, just pale apes. We look very similar. We look very much alike when you have a perspective that's far enough away. If you stand from a high enough vantage point, everything looks roughly smooth and roughly the same. And that's what we need, to see things as they are, not incredibly distinct and varied. We as Black Americans, white Americans, Asians, South Asians, everybody, Africans, South Americans, whatever you want to call us, we're all almost identical from a high enough vantage point. And that's what I would hope people could work their way to seeing. And then the differences, then the possibilities, then the giving up of this and that are less severe. They're tolerable. Just like letting go of your life and accepting what may come is more tolerable. But that's what I have to say about that. Let me know what you think about psilocybin. Are you curious about it? Do you believe that perspective is needed sorely and badly right now, as I do? If so, let me know in this comment section below. Like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and share this video with anybody you think that could use some perspective right now. And if you have questions, once again, that you want to send to me directly, send them to me at questions@lexbenjamin.com, and I will check them out and respond to them over there. So thank you for watching this one. I really appreciate it. I will see you on the next one. You have a great day. Later.